we have Jenna Switzer on online at the BS machine or bullshit machine, and Jenna is a pleasure coach, and I'm so glad to have her on because me and Jenna have been chatting for we've known each other what 6 months or 12 months or something, and yeah, we've been sort of chatting a fair bit about pleasure and sexuality, sensuality, tantra, all that type of stuff. And Jen is so good because just from what I've known of her and what I've learned, she sort of dived into this whole world of creating pleasure, not just for herself, but for others as well. And that's pretty much your job, isn't it? You just create pleasure for everyone.
Yeah, it's the world's best job ever.
It's
Bringing
so
more,
cool.
well, I would say like I'm like empowering people to bring pleasure into their own life because I would never want to take on the responsibility of trying to give that to people. But yeah, it's pretty fantastic to I don't know, just to be the person that people go to like enhance their pleasure and to feel better in life. It's the best job.
So cool. And so what, like, how did you, just before we sort of dive into it all, just give us a quick rundown. Like, so you're living in Bali now and you're basically living a life of absolute paradise. Like, that's so fucking cool, man.
Yeah, so I was a yoga teacher, well, full-time yoga teacher for about 7 years before coming to Bali, and it's been almost 2 years now. And yeah, so when I was teaching yoga, I was very focused on anatomy. That was kind of my jam. And after I had some pretty intense experiences, I decided to kind of narrow in on the pelvic floor. So there's a set of musculature at the bottom of your torso that's referred to as the pelvic floor. And physically, it's quite complex. There's a lot to it in both men and women. It's very, very similar. And
Mm.
then I started teaching all these pelvic floor workshops and they were selling out like crazy, but it felt like I was missing half of the story. So, what is happening physically matters absolutely. And what's happening energetically is at least 50%. For a lot of us, it can be even more than 50% of the story. So then when the pandemic hit, obviously in-person classes weren't happening. I
Mm.
had kind of all kinds of big plans that got shifted. And I think it's for the absolute best. I'm stoked because it really allowed me the space to niche down into this pelvic floor and pleasure work that I'm doing now. So I've been doing that for, I've been completely focused on it for almost 2 years now. But it's been kind of in my life for the last 5 years. So it's
Yeah,
pretty exciting.
it is. It is. It is so cool because, I guess even just my own experiences around, well, but sexuality, sensuality, even, the pelvic floor and really understanding what that's all about. It's so weird because it's almost like the way I've experienced is that it's a very unspoken thing. And we were chatting before we got onto the podcast around how much guilt and shame people feel around sexuality. And, ultimately it is the pelvic floor, because unless we know how to use it, that emotion and even physically, it's like it all happens there, doesn't it? So it's like, what do you see with your clients, and what are the major sort of hurdles you reckon people come up against?
I think one of the biggest for male and female is this societal norm of what we should or shouldn't want or should or shouldn't like. So there's this phrase guilty pleasure that you hear quite often.
Mm,
And all that is people who think they should feel bad for liking something that they actually really like. So as far as I'm concerned, there should be no such thing as a guilty pleasure. It should just be pleasure, right?
yeah.
Whether that's like a friend of mine last night was saying like, how he has a guilty pleasure of like watching an entire season of something in one day. And I was like, you know, that shouldn't be guilty. What about that is guilty? Like, just enjoy it. And that goes from everything from, liking slow, long walks to, things you like in the bedroom that are different, or being interested in people's feet and finding people's feet to be a turn on. So I feel that guilt really often is from societal norms, or it can be handed through like family stuff, right? What we're taught. There's religious dogma, there's all kinds of, it feels like the way we're raised is just perpetuated with ways to feel guilty, and very, very few ways to like really embrace feeling good. And very few of us are raised with the appreciation to like savor what feels good and really go for what feels good, as opposed to like suppress it. Moderation, I do believe moderation and balance is great. And for some of us, this moderation and balance business is not, like, we're taking that way too far.
Yeah.
In my
Yeah. It's just as you're talking then, it's so interesting because it made me think of an experience I had um, in one of my relationships where I've always had this thing, like in the bedroom, I've always had this thing with my partner just wearing stilettos, and they have to be like a certain type. And I've been like, I never mentioned it in any of my relationships, right? Except one. And I remember I told my girlfriend back then that like it fucking turns me on if you're just wearing stilettos, and then we end up having sex or whatever. But and then what happened was, from that, she goes, oh, so do you like strippers, do you? So right, so you want to go to the strippers, you want to go to this, you want to, and I was like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said anything. No. So it's so interesting, isn't it? Because after that, I it made me feel like that's wrong, and I shouldn't have and I felt guilty and I felt shameful. I'm like, all right, cool, I'm never mentioning anything like that again. So is that sort of what you're alluding to, like allowing yourself to really communicate what it is that you want?
Yeah, and like the interesting thing is that so often it feels like there are two polarities, right? There's the side that's kind of like you and I'm this way as well, is as soon as someone takes it the wrong way, we assume it's our fault. Like, we should never
Mm.
say it again. We should never. And then you have people who are like the polar opposite, where it's always the other person's fault. Like, what's your problem? Like, why won't you wear stilettos? So there's balance somewhere in the middle, right? Of, okay, so, when I told you what I wanted, it made you uncomfortable. And I know that I'm not interested in strippers. I'm interested in you. And I want you to wear sexy stilettos because they're sexy. And then for her to recognize, like, wow, I have an area of self-confidence that needs maybe some work, because, that instantly triggered me. And I can see that that's not the version of me that I want to be. One of the things, so energetically, you and I have talked about energy before. Actually, you were a part of my course for men, all about pleasure. So it's kind of cool to be able to talk about this again.
Yeah.
So energetically, at the bottom of your spine, they say it's your root chakra. That's your sense of grounding. Just above that is your pleasure and your creativity, which is your sacral chakra. And then just above that, so Kundalini yoga lineages say that it's just below the belly button. Hatha lineages say it is above the navel. But anyway, it's around the abdominal area, and it's said to be your place of confidence. So one of the things that I see most often in this pleasure work that I'm doing is that people's confidence build like crazy through pleasure. When people allow themselves to feel good and allow themselves to be reminded that they deserve to feel good, the confidence level skyrockets. So it's like, once you have that grounding energy, once you allow yourself to feel good, your ability to feel confident in who you are just grows incredibly. And, as a woman, I think about, like, when I think about like a sexy, hot girl, I often think of that confidence that I assume she has, right?
Mm.
And that confidence comes from that supportive energy down below to keep that confidence like energized and the energy flowing into that area, right?
Mm. Yeah. That's yeah, it's interesting. And so what about, because yeah, as you're talking, what keeps coming back to me is how this would relate um to well, obviously in relationships, how this would I guess the meat and potatoes of it, you know what I mean? Like, if you're in a relationship, and I'm just going by my experience, I know there's, sex becomes such a a thing where it has to be part of a relationship. And then I feel like a lot of people don't go past that thing where they actually have those uncomfortable conversations where that they feel safe to talk about what their guilty pleasures are, or they're safe to talk about, hey babe, do you know what? Like even with me, like I felt this in the past too, where I'd walk past my girlfriend um in the kitchen, and I just had this thing of like, fuck, I just want to rip her panties off and I just want to go for it, you know? But then I was like, no, 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 no. Like she's going to feel like a slut, or she's going to, it's not going to be all sensual and whatever. So I reckon there's this big thing around, where we're sort of going with this is around the shame and guilt of having the courage to speak up. And so would you say that in relationships, would it be a case where you would set something up to say, hey, babe, do you know what? Why don't we have a conversation about what our guilty pleasures are, or what we've thought about in the past, and maybe put it on the table and see if we can have a play with it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important thing to have earlier in your conversation. Like, hey, what are your what are the things that like make you immediately hit the brakes, right? So if you think about, there's this book called Come As You Are that's really great, and she talks about the brakes and the gas, right? So what hits your brakes? And I can tell you right now, if somebody makes some sort of derogatory comment about me not being smart, or like, oh, like, thank goodness you're pretty, like that hits my brakes harder than I can tell you. And maybe for a guy, it's being made fun of or being demasculated in some way, or maybe it's nagging, I don't know. But to be able to have that conversation up front and say like, hey, this is when my brakes really get hit. This is where I'm kind of in the yellow zone, where like sometimes it's a go, sometimes it's not. And then this is where it's like absolutely full on, right? And some people might be like, okay, so when I'm doing like daily chores, as long as I'm not in a rush, like that's totally a go zone. Where someone else might be like, I'm just one of those people, I need to get through the daily chores and then you can tear my clothes off. But like during, not so much. And the other thing that I want to talk about with guilt, especially with men, is that men don't always want to rip women's clothes off. Like this is a fact, okay? We all have libidos that like rise and fall, and this is, part of life. And there seems to be a lot of guilt with men and overcompensation that I think is like unhealthy and uncomfortable, in that they feel like they need to want it all the time, right? If you can have a conversation up front that says like, hey, it really hits my brakes, like, when I'm stressed at work, I'm just gonna tell you right now, like my libido drops like crazy. And it has nothing to do with how sexy you are or how attracted to you I am or like my masculinity. It just is how I work, right? And able to have those conversations up front rather than like in the heat of the moment where things can be a little more tense. Like I think that's so sexy. And to me, like nothing makes me feel better than being allowed to be all the parts that I am. Here's a weird kinky thing I'm into. What do you think? And then, as long as it's not in the heat of the moment, usually the other person can objectively look at it and be like, yeah, okay, that's hot. Or, oh, maybe we can, do that a little different,
Yeah. That's such a cool, that's awesome. I love that. And even just as we're talking, I just keep thinking of newer and newer things because, just through my own experiences of what, what's happened to me. And what about, because you talk a lot about, even before you create pleasure in the bedroom or you create pleasure in relationships, you talk a lot about learning how to self pleasure and give yourself the gift of pleasuring, which may not be a sexual thing at all. So what are the things that what are the things you've come across with some of your clients where you've taught them some things and it's sort of like transformed their vision of or their idea of what pleasure actually is?
So I think the key to pleasure in the bedroom is pleasure outside of the bedroom. There are those occasional like explosively hot experiences that most of us have had that are just like wham bam, holy wow. But the sustainability is a bit off, right? So the ability to have sexy, consistent, like bedroom experiences, really, there's a few things. So allowing yourself to feel pleasure outside of the bedroom. This is where it all starts, especially women. I think women more so, and men, I would say like there's a lot of guilt that they need to work through. But for everybody, just like knowing that you deserve to feel good. And the way you really know that is to prove it to yourself. right? Because you're constantly in relationship with your conscious brain and your unconscious brain, right? So my subconscious might be saying like, yeah, you're not really worth that. But my conscious brain is like, yeah, I am. So how do I prove to my subconscious programming through my religious background and my conservative family upbringing that I actually do deserve pleasure? The way to do it is to make it happen every day. So this could look like a variety of things. I've had some students who put fresh flowers in their bedroom every single day. That is a non-negotiable. They do it every day. And just because it feels good. And then I have another student who walks to a park and she either swings on a swing or like if it's raining, stands with an umbrella. She does that every single day. You know, to me, one of the really important things was giving myself an orgasm every day, because for so long I was taught that that was bad and that like the only time that should be happening is when I'm with a partner. So that's actually a pretty consistent part of my reminder, is that this is something that's really important. Taking showers, like just like taking a shower for the pure sake of enjoying water on your body, not because you need to get clean, not because you're going somewhere, but just like experiencing how that good that is. Music, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes, but that every single day you do something that feels really good to you. And the only reason you do it is because it feels good, not because, you know, like maybe you play music and you're like, okay, well, I need to practice for 30 minutes. So it's like two birds, one stone. It has to be exclusively for feeling good.
And you reckon every day we should basically massage pleasure into our
Other
lives?
effing every single fucking day. Yeah.
Yeah. And is it something you'd like, I don't know, would you put it in your diary? It's like, oh, pleasure time.
I mean, the thing is like, yeah, some of us, honest to goodness, need to schedule it in. Like, we need to say, like, okay, after lunch every day. I knew this personal trainer and it was like really important for her. And so she had a block after lunch every day, because that's when her libido was the highest. Between 1 and 2, she went home and had an orgasm every single day. And like,
That's awesome.
man, if you have to schedule it in, schedule it in. Eventually it'll become something that you won't give up. Like, you'll
Yeah.
automatically know that's something you want for yourself.
And also, it just seems so obvious to me, like just talking about this, is that it's almost like you're training your body and you're training the mind, that if you give yourself pleasure every single day, which doesn't have to be an orgasm, that was just an example, right?
Yeah.
But if you give yourself some form of pleasure every single day, and you know that it's in there, and you're going to happen, that you're going to make pleasure for yourself, then that pleasure keeps expanding. If you're doing it every fucking day, like, holy shit, imagine how much that will grow. And it's
Yeah.
almost impossible to have a day then where you're not experiencing some sort of joy and pleasure and whatever. And then imagine what that would do in the bedroom, where you're feeling really confident in your own pleasure, and you're happy in your own skin, and you're like, you know what, I'm choosing to be here because this is going to be a pleasureful experience for both of us, but I've got all the pleasure to share here with you. So like, let's fucking go. And then I guess that guilt, it's sort of like the pleasure overrides the guilt or the shame. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about the guilt, especially with men, that you sort of mentioned before? What, you know, where does that come from? Because I think it's such an important topic for men to understand. Because I know with me, I've definitely felt a lot of guilt, a lot of shame around sexuality, simply because of, I guess, expectations that I put on myself. I know my mates have, people that I'm close to, guys I'm close to, we've had really honest conversations around sex and the lack of it, or the expectations around it. So what's in your experience, what's like the main sort of thing with men that they feel around guilt and shame?
It feels, in my experience with the men that I've worked with, it's a lot to do with ideas around masculinity, you know, around like what their sex is supposed to be like. And, you know, it's perpetuated by women, you know, like in the same way, you know, women's sexuality, you know, and what we consider to be sexy in women is perpetuated by toxic masculinity, it's the same. Like it's toxic femininity where we're like really oppressing men to fit into this box. You must look like this, you must be like this, you know, and you're not allowed to cry, and it's really unsexy when you don't kill the spider, and like, you know, like we just like we pigeonhole men, and then they don't fit. Like nobody feels good shoved in a box ever. So if my expectation is that you're always going to be ready to go, you're always looking after other women, if you're not having sex with me, you're going to find it somewhere else, you know, and that, you know, you're always going to want sex to be kinkier than me, or like those are like things that a lot of men just they don't feel good in, you know, the amount of experiences that I've had with male students who are just like, you know, I really just like romantic things. That's what I like. You know, I want to be monogamous for the rest of my life. Or, you know, some guys have really low sex drive for years and years and years, and they feel guilty about it or embarrassed by it. Or there's so many things that just kind of like weigh on a man. And like with women, we're blessed to have the option of lubricant. And men, I mean, you have a purple pill, but that's not exactly a great option. So there's this expectation and this heaviness and this weight that men can carry from the guilt of what they're supposed to be like. And then that transforms into their body and not being able to get hard, not keeping an erection, coming too quickly, all of these things. And then that guilt just like weighs heavier, which just seems to like perpetuate the issue. Or you feel guilty because you want it so much and your partner doesn't want it. Like there's just so many, man, it like, the more I talk about it, the more it like breaks my heart, because it is hard to be a man. It is really, really hard, especially in the bedroom. And I think that this idea of having pleasure practices outside of the bedroom, it's like a muscle, right? You build your capacity to have these experiences, and you build your confidence, right? And in that confidence, you're able to approach your partner and be really candid. And you're able to hold the space that if they overreact, if, you know, they're like, you just want to have sex with everyone, and that's why you're saying this. It's like, okay, I understand that it might feel that way to you, and I know that that's not where I'm coming from. And you're able to like support that energy of confidence because you've already built that capacity for pleasure.
A lot of wise words there, Jen.
Thanks.
And what about in women? I mean, what do you think with women? Just I guess, you know, it'd be good to see both perspectives, because everything you just said about men, obviously you've worked with a lot of them, because you totally understand everything you've said. I totally related to. So what about women? I mean, what should men look out for when they're going? I mean, what are the main things women sort of fear or around pleasure? Or what's the shame or the guilt that women feel?
They often feel they don't deserve it. Like we often put women on pedestals of like, you know, she gave up her career, her job, her life, you know, everything for her children and her family. And it's like we put those women on a pedestal. And like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing per se. And a woman having to put off everything that makes her feel good for the happiness of other people, she's not going to be like the cool thing. And we've talked about this before, how Taoists view the sexual energy in women and men. So men, it's more about energy conservation, right? So circulating the energy rather than ejaculating through an orgasm, like holding the ejaculation and just allowing that energy to be inside of you. And for women, it's the exact opposite. We get energized and we like blossom into this beautiful version of ourselves the more we orgasm. So
that's so fucking annoying.
I know, it's the best about being a girl. Sucks to be you guys, but fantastic for us.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
yeah.
what you see most commonly is that men ejaculate quickly, right? Like it's more of a problem for them to hold it in. And then for women, it's like we can't even get there. So it's a really ironic thing that shows us like how our energies are just not in the space that maybe is the healthiest or the most supportive for a balanced life. So with women, I would say one of the things is like, you know, if you're out with a woman and she, you know, she has a lot of shame around feeling good, you know, like she doesn't want to order dessert, or I mean, like that's being a bit judgmental. I won't say that, but that's one of the areas that I see women like hold themselves back, is like they're embarrassed to order dessert because they don't want to be that girl that likes dessert. It's like, motherfucking, I have gone out and ordered every dessert on the menu because like I couldn't decide what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to be like crazy about it, but you can be if you want. Like, it's your pleasure. And so I think it's really important to, if I'm talking about how a masculine can support that feminine pleasure, to like give her space for it and remind her that she deserves it. And then encourage her to do it for herself, because it's one thing to have a man like send me flowers, for me to have fresh flowers in my bedroom every single day, some man sending them to me. But at the end of the day, that doesn't actually build my own confidence or my own sense of pleasure. I get a sense of being spoiled, but I don't get that same stability. Like, once he leaves, all of a sudden my source of pleasure is gone. And it shouldn't be that way, right? One of the, most sexiest things is when you are, where none of us are autonomous. We all need each other, and we should be able to like provide that love and that support that we need for ourselves on our own when it's time.
So wait, I was confused then. What do you mean? Like, so you're saying from a woman's perspective, the sexiest thing is what?
From a women's perspective, from a perspective of like, as a woman, I don't remember saying that.
No, you just said something around the sexiest thing ever is, because I was like, oh my God, she's about to give us the key to something. Fucking, what is it? Tell me.
I don't even remember.
I'm about to get the key to women, and then you just fucking left us hanging.
Yeah, sorry. No.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
Well, that
gone.
sucks. Maybe if we
let me backtrack. If I talk about like being a woman and like what's the sexiest thing that a partner, it's like giving me the space to support my pleasure, right? So when I was younger, I remember a few times in the bedroom where like I had sex with a guy and then I didn't orgasm. And I was like fairly certain I could get there if we just had a few more minutes. So like, okay, like if it's not too much trouble, like, can we just like spend a few minutes and get me there? And he's like, yeah, or like I'm really tired or whatever. But a man who's like, oh yeah, that's super hot, like let's go for it. That's amazing. When I go out for dinner, we'll say I'm on a dinner date. Do people still do that? I live in Bali. Life's weird. But anyway, if I'm on a dinner date and a guy's like, why don't we order, this thing for dessert? And we'll just like pick at it together. Like, I'm stoked. Just like, I know it's silly, but it's like these little ways that someone can support me and my pleasure and like what feels good for me. You don't necessarily have to do it for me, but like support me in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely makes sense. I like it.
So that it becomes more of like a teamwork experience, right? I think that the majority, okay, I have no idea what the majority of women, and I will say pretty consistently, I see women don't necessarily want things done for them. They just want a partner to like support them in it, so they don't have to do it all themselves. And maybe that's the same for men, is that, when it comes to these like sexual experiences, like, yeah, we can probably take care of things by ourselves. We probably don't need someone else to like have an orgasm of any kind. And it's just really nice to have somebody else there for it,
Yeah. That's it's a yeah. It's such a cool thing to really dive into, because so many people just have issues around, well, not I wouldn't call them issues, I'd call them, so many people have challenges around true, like I know, true sexuality, true sensuality, and just even what we're talking about. One of the things I thought of, which I don't know why I thought of, and maybe some listeners or viewers will maybe relate to it, but there's this thing where and I've fallen into this thing too in the past, but recently I've become a lot more open with other things. But you fall into this thing where sex becomes, it's like, all right, we're making out, and then the guy's like, all right, I'll go down on you and fucking make you come, and then we fuck, and then we either get there, don't get there, and then I'll come, and then I'll lie back, and then the chick's like, oh well, I haven't come yet, and the guy's like, oh, all right, I better fucking finger you or whatever the fuck, It's like it just becomes this thing.
Play by play. Got it.
And then you just like that's the worst thing when it becomes this this step-by-step thing,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I'm just sort of thinking back to it where I was like that, where it's like, it's like, oh cool, we're kissing, and then you go down, and then you fuck, and then and then so you have this step-by-step process that's in your head, but then it's almost like you don't let the pleasure, or you don't let the beauty of the moment take you to where it needs to go. And then sort of what happens is that like, let's say the guy then goes, all right, whoops, oh no, wait, I don't know what happened there, but it was, I'm gonna push record again. Oh yeah, cool. Let's say the guy, when he goes down on her, and then what happens is that and then the girl goes, oh, I don't want you to do that. I don't like you doing that. So when a girl says a guy does it, she doesn't like a guy going down on her, what's actually going on behind that? Like, what is it? What's happening there?
It can be so many different things. Like there's like embarrassment. There's something called labiaplasty, which is the alteration of the it's the alteration of the labia minora, which are like kind of the lips to the vagina. And it is wild how popular this surgery is. And women get so self-conscious of this area of their body because, the only thing they've ever seen are these like photoshopped women. Like I remember when I was a kid going into like my friend's basement, and like her dad had a pinup of a woman. And I was like, oh, that's what women's bodies look like. Like,
yeah.
I've never seen that before. Or like when you're watching porn, right? And like you see this, and you have this idea. And so there can be like a lot of self-confidence issues. And these can be like from society. It can be from past partners. I've had some partners say some really weird things to me that like now I can't even imagine someone having the balls to say something like that to me. But like then I was like, oh God, I should be self-conscious about that.
Wait, are we talking about innies and outies?
Yeah, could be. Yeah, could be innies and outies. Fuck. That's not what they're called, Tommy. That's not what they're called.
It's like
anyway, it could be all kinds of different things. It could be trauma, honestly. Like they associate that act with something traumatic that's happened in their past that they just haven't been able to work through yet. Right? It could be so many different things.
I've had the same thing where girls wanted to go down on me, and I'm like, you know what? It just didn't feel comfortable. So I've had that experience too, where I just didn't want them to go down there.
Yeah, and like the thing is that there's a way that this can all be unsexy, and there's a way that it can be sexy. In the same way, like someone's breathing, like breathing is one of my kinks, right? So like the way people breathe is like so sensual to me. And I'm a yoga teacher. So I can tell you right now that not every time somebody breathes, I'm getting all like worked up about it. Like sometimes I'm just listening to hear, is there like tension in their throat? How deep is their breath? Blah, 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 blah. And there's times where I do allow it to be sexy. So in the same way, like asking consent, like, hey, can I take your clothes off? Or like, hey, can I kiss you now? There are ways that it's sexy, and there are ways that you're just making it like really effing awkward. So like finding that dance of like sexy and asking, and then, if someone's going down on me, I'm just not feeling it right now for whatever reason, to say like, hey, I'm not into that, but God, it would be so hot if you did this other thing. And then it like immediately pivots rather than like hitting the brakes. And then the guy's like, oh God, what else can't I do? Like, I'm so worried. Or the girl is like, oh shit, like, is that because he doesn't really like me, or I'm not really good at it? Is that the problem? If you pivot rather than just like, okay, stop, you're done.
Yeah.
Then you don't even know where to go from there. So there's ways to say like, hey, I'm not super into that, but you know what I am really into? Like, here's another option that would really turn me on. And then you've just completely like made the situation even better because, the reason someone's going down on you is because they want you to feel good. And so if you can give them something else that's going to make you feel good, then you're both winning, right?
Yeah, yeah. They seem like such simple conversations, don't they? But it's fucking hard to do. Like it is, because you don't know if the other person's open to having those conversations or whatever. But it's just so obvious and so evident that all it takes is you've got to set it up in a way where both of you are sort of coming to the party, and you're like, hey, you know what? If we're gonna have sex and we're gonna feel pleasure and sensuality, you're like, let's get in a safe space and let's have a conversation. But that's the key, isn't it? So I bet there's definitely some listeners out there right now, well, including myself, as I talk and listen to you. I'm like, I want to have those conversations about sex moving forward, because especially at the start of a relationship, or whether at the start, end, or wherever, or the middle, or through it, whatever. But how powerful is it to say, hey, do you know what? Like, let's talk about sex. Let's talk about the vulnerabilities. Let's talk about it all and get it all on the table so that we know what's up with each other and we can support each other.
And it can be done in an unsexy way, and it can be done in a sexy way. So an unsexy way might be like, I'm on a date with a guy, or I'm like kind of chatting with a guy, and this has happened to me. And, one of the things I could say is like, hey, I'm really not into, this or that, or I don't really like this, and, I don't want that. That's going to be like, like, that's not fun. That doesn't empower him to feel good. Things that I could say is like, hey, I'm not really into like, I want to be kissed before anything else happens, and I think it's really sexy, that time of sexual tension before you actually have sex. So like, cool. I'm super into like drawing that out. What do you think? And then that allows him to be like, actually, what does it for me is like a really quick, like in and out, and then like sitting and bask, like it just gives people the opportunity to talk. And to me, it's such a win. And yeah, there are going to be assholes. There are going to be, girls who are, don't have the self-confidence to handle you saying what you want. And I bet you that if you offer a supportive space, the amount of women who are going to be like, oh, thank God, you know what? I am totally into this. And I'm so glad you asked, because that really turns me on. I think that women will really like rise to that space that men are holding for us, in the same way that men are really going to allow themselves to be who they are when women are like giving the parameters of what they want. Like it's a cool back and forth. And I say men and women, but it's not true. Like, it's, in my personal experience, it's worked like women to women as well. And even men to men, like when, if you have a bisexual man or you have a gay man, like having those conversations. My friend Nigel Walker and I were discussing how in the gay community, it's a real struggle, because there's this idea that everybody just wants like wham bam in there, get it done kind of thing. And there are a lot of men, gay and hetero and bi and queer, who actually want to have these types of conversations as well. Yeah. So it really runs the gamut of like humanity, It's
all encompassing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So powerful. I've learned so much out of our chat today. There's so much to talk about. Maybe we'll need to do a round 2 or something in a few weeks.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because there's so much to talk about with this stuff. And obviously, how cool is it for you that you sort of work in this space, and that's your job. You're a fucking pleasure coach.
I know. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jen, so good to have you on. I'm sure everyone's learned so much. And I reckon we'll have to get you back for round 2 and go a little bit deeper into this stuff, because I think that today I just want to get into the sort of meat and potatoes of it, but I think there's some real stuff that I'd like to explore with you around guilt and shame, to see where we can take that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Thanks for having me today, Tommy. I'm glad.
No worries. Awesome, Jen. All right. Have a good time.
Thanks. Bye.